Hey, this is a little bit different. It's kind of a one of my first attempts at a sort of scripted video. We'll see how it goes. But so earlier today, I was kind of thinking about Cyber Sleuth, right? Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. I was wondering what exactly is the best starter in it. So this is sort of my sort of thoughts after a bit of research, sort of collecting all that research and thoughts into one sort of video, right? So I want to set some ground rules before we start. I'm assuming that these, so I'm going based off of the gridosaur evolution lines, right? So anything like de-evolving from, say, like a Rapidmon into one of the pre-evolved forms that isn't Gargomon for Terriermon, right? That's not something we're covering today. We're going over explicitly just the Gridosaur evolution lines. Otherwise, this becomes an absolute mess that I will not be able to cover. Um, so this is, and then obviously any Digimon. Sorry, set up. Um, but yeah, just Gridosaur lines. Pretty much that's all we're covering, right? It's also kind of covers some common arguments I found from other people when I was talking about this with my friends, right? So the start for starters, some people call this like a subjective matter. You might be right. I don't really want to argue objectivity versus subjectivity today, but I just want to look at the data we have and kind of evaluate what I think the best starter is based off my personal experience and how I view the data we collected. If you want to draw your own conclusions from this data, go right ahead, right? There's also the argument that the starter choice doesn't really matter, and that you get such diversity of types and attributes so early on in this game that realistically you can cover for any weaknesses very easily very early on. And that is also true. It's what I love about this game. You can make a very diverse team pretty early on, in my opinion, right? But I just think that me personally, I would how do I phrase this? I think there is still some Digimon that are better than others, right? Regardless of the ability to easily cover their weaknesses, some of these Digimon are going to have evolutions that are just going to be better than the other options available by the granted by the other Digimon starters, right? So I'm just going to go over what I think has the sort of best options for what the matchups throughout the game are going to be, right? Because like regardless of the matchups, because realistically that doesn't really matter. I will completely up for the arguments because just based off the data I have is supported by type matchups a lot, but I do think that ultimately the variety of options that evolution tree gives kind of matters a bit more than what exactly the types are, right? But types do tend to come up a little bit, right? So for this video, I'm mainly focusing on the required boss fights needed to beat Digimon Story's Cyber Sleuth. So I'm ignoring all side quests and we're not covering the Great Challenges or the Seven Demon Lords DLC, just the mainline story stuff. Um, And if this gets about 20 views, I might actually do the research and write a script for the Hacker's Memory side of things after I beat that game. I'm pretty close to beating it, so when I do, I'd love to make another video for this about this topic. How I landed upon the sort of list of bosses I have is I went through a GameFAQs walkthrough guide. And I just sort of jotted down the everything that I listed as a boss, not including what it says mini bosses or the bosses of specific quests that aren't main quests, right? So just something interesting I found through this data actually, if I can pull this up, is we have a lot of free types, obviously, because we have 18 free types because of the Eaters, obviously. But I believe the second most common is virus is more common. Interesting. Yeah, that makes almost sense. I don't know why I thought free would be more, but there is a lot of virus. Obviously, virus makes sense as the most, with Eaters as a close second. We have 13 data types, which I guess kind of makes sense. We have the Dynasmons and Leopardmon, as well as Jimmy Ken's whole thing, right? And finally, we have, what is it at? We're also notably looking at how many vaccines there are, which is only 9 boss fights in the game that have a vaccine Digimon in them, which is fascinating to me. That's half of the second most, which is Eaters, right? So that's just some fun facts about the data I found. Looking at this, we're looking for probably a strong vaccine type for a lot of the viruses, but notably, we need to watch out for fire weaknesses from Jimmy Ken. And data is going to be a bit of an issue early on, maybe, but by the time Jimmy Ken starts ramping up, we probably will have a virus to deal with them. I'm not super worried about that because we're mainly focusing on early game like power, the ability to how it matches up with the early game, how it matches up with the early game, and the options granted in the late game, right? Because pretty much the late game you have so many more options and availability to you that it's more so I'm focusing on what exactly its matchups are early on, and then seeing what the availability, sort of like what is worth it to evolve into in the end game is what I'm looking at basically, right? For that later half of things. Uh, and also, this is another reason why we might be looking for like a light vaccine in particular because of the multitude of Crusadermon fights, which is what we're looking at. So that's kind of so. Yeah, I also tossed around the idea of looking for a strong free attribute Digimon, something that has a good matchup into at least a somewhat good matchup into everything, no matter what. The issue was it wasn't really sort of many end game options for that. We had like the Sophimon and we had Sophimon and Valkyriermon from I believe it was Terriermon's line. And what's interesting is we also had I think also we had Diaboromon from we also could get to Diaboromon and Vicomon through Terriermon. So Terriermon had kind of the best options for that. I think we can get to Apocalypse Mon through Palmon, but that's literally never happening, right? I think same for we could probably get to Apocalypse Mon through Machine Dramon, but again, that's not likely happening in a standard playthrough. 120 ABI is stupid. But yeah, so those are kind of are what we're looking for here is something that matches up well in the early game. Hopefully, something that can evolve into a powerful vaccine type. Or we look for like early vaccine, right? Is a major contender here because of that, and just something that can help with the late game Crusadermon and maybe even some of the other Royal Knights would be nice. So yeah, let's take a look at some of our starters here. Kind of starting with Palmon. I think Palmon is probably the worst choice, just at least in my opinion, because the very first boss fight outside of the tutorial is Groundmon. Alright? That's 3 times super damage into Palmon. Unless you evolve it into like Woodmon, Kuwagamon, Vegemon, or Mudfridgemon, which crits either 1.5 times or half damage. And there's a lot of power, like so there's a lot of fire types very early on, thanks to Jinriken and his Miramon, right? And the late game, all the viruses from Crusadermon are not looking great in my opinion. And you have the Machine Dramon fights and Fae fights, right? It just isn't. It just it's not a great matchup a lot of the time. You can go like Mudfridgemon, Pandamon, the Justamon. That gets you pretty decent vaccine types throughout, right? But there is like obviously we have like Togemon, Lilymon, into Rosemon, who is one of the best supports in the game, but you're kind of locking yourself into kind of a like you're kind of locking yourself into a route that is going to struggle with a lot of the major bosses until you unlock that extreme support potential that it has. So you're kind of dragging it along for quite a while, right? And we're kind of comparing that to Hagurumon, right, which has my go-to line for this argument for it is it's Goldramon, and we can go Andromon into High Andromon because Metal Empire boosted nanomachine break threes are disgusting in my opinion, disgustingly strong. So that's a very solid option. And virus types do surprisingly well at the early game. At least because they're neutral against a variety of, they are neutral against the variety of virus types like Groundmon and the Blue Marimon, there's virus and Wisemon, right? But notably, they are super effective against Jimmy Ken's team. And I feel like Jimmy Ken is probably, I think, one of the harder parts of the early game. Some of his later fights in the early game are one of the harder parts of it for me. Well, not for me, it's one of the harder parts in general, I think. And so having like a super effective damage into those is pretty solid in my opinion. And then by the time you get to the late game viruses, you can have like Angelmon, High Angelmon, right? Um, is there really any other notable lines here? Like you can go Clockmon for the Nightmon, which gets you into a few of the Roto Knights. If you want to work towards those, is not bad. Wisemon gets you into Piedmon and Apocalypsemon, of course. So that's always an option. What is Datamon? I never looked at Datamon. Gets you to Machine Dramon, which is incredible, obviously. Another way to get into Gestamon here, which is nice. There's a lot of Royal Knight options if you want to work towards this for Hagurumon, and those are all usually pretty strong, but none of these are really super standard. I'm sorry, I didn't phrase that wrong, but so the Hagurumon is a good option in my opinion. Two of the evolutions are kind of duds with Gold Numemon and Platinum Sukamon, but Starmon, Clockmon, and Gardamon all give you pretty solid options in my opinion. But then you take a look at Terriermon and realize that this was never really a contest. Terriermon kind of has everything. You have powerful int attackers, Suikakumon, going to like Whalemon and the Plesiomon, right? You have a solid early game attacker with Gargamon. His bullseye makes your nanomachine breaks never miss, which is incredible. With Gargamon even gets you to powerful attackers with Tiger Vespamon and Mega Girl Gargamon, or an insane healer and support with Cherubinimon. Good, right? We have insane like Glass Cannon physical special attackers with Angie Woman into fucking name an Angie Woman, but they're all incredible. We have Steelfeedmon, as I mentioned earlier, which can get into Sakuyamon, another powerful special attacker. Dynasmon has pretty good spread damage, in my opinion, right? And literally, there's not even a reason to pick Palmon because you can just get you can just get to Rosemon and have a stronger early game with Terriermon, Gatomon, right? There's like there's this Terriermon has such an embarrassment of riches in this game. It has incredible, like it has like a lot of options for the vaccine lights we were talking about to deal with Crusadermon, right? And it's so absurd how many incredible late game options it has. That's the virus for the early game viability, right? And even its champion levels all have something different to offer. We have powerful int spamming, right, with Gatomon and Unimon. We have bulky physical, I believe, in Ikaku, and just a powerful electric accurate with high accuracy with Gargamon, right? It's consistent damage and like big int damage, and then it's just there's so much going for Terriermon that it astounds me, right? Um, and like sure you're stuck with vaccines for the entirety of the champion levels, right? But by the time you do need to branch out beyond that, because again, vaccines are good in the early game, by the time you're able to branch out beyond that, if you do have to swap over to another type, there's so many different options, right? So that's kind of how I view Terriermon as the best one. If you sort of have any of the thoughts that you want to draw from this data, I will link this sort of doc below, right? So you can sort of scan through it on your own and see, hey, there might be some matchups I missed or some evolutions I might have missed. You can check out yourself. and sort of share your own sort of thoughts on this data and how you view it through your own experiences. I'd love to hear that. Again, if this gets like past 20 views, I will do the research and post a video covering the hacker's memory starters. Um, so, as soon as I finish that game, I probably might even do that regardless. But hey, 20 views, right? I'll do it for 20 views. Um, that's kind of all from me, I'll be honest. I will see you all next time, and I hope you guys enjoyed this little exercise in data analysis and sort of like opinion, not opinion, but like analysis of data and sort of how I view the results of it and how I think the best, how the best. Whatever. I'm rambling. I'm sorry. I'll see you all next time.